The night their million-dollar mansion sank into black water, the president of the HOA screamed his name as if he had pulled the trigger on the flood. Sirens echoed while cars floated like broken toys, neighbors filming as accusations cut through the chaos. How could a simple fight over dues explode into ruin like this? Before we begin, like this video and comment where you're watching from so we know you're part of this story. The water slammed into the first mansion like a fist through glass, tearing apart everything the board had sworn was untouchable. Karen's voice ripped through the chaos, not in fear, but in rage, screaming his name, blaming him as if he had commanded the flood itself. Neighbors clutched their phones, recording as luxury cars bobbed like plastic toys, chandeliers snapped loose, and the empire of the board crumbled before their eyes. The sirens were not there to save anyone. They were there to witness judgment. And yet, in that moment of collapse, all eyes turned not to the drowning mansions, but to the man Karen pointed at like a villain. Why him? Why now? It had started with a letter shoved through his mailbox weeks earlier. A notice so cold, so arrogant, it might as well have been written in stone. The HOA had tripled his dues, citing an emergency dam repair. Pay or lose the home his father had left him. Pay or watch everything vanish. He stared at the paper until his hands shook. Emergency repairs? Yet no machines, no crews, not even a sign of work. Only threats stapled to doors and neighbors whispering about liens. Why repair something that wasn't broken? Why hide the proof behind locked doors? He paid once, just enough to buy time, but the numbers didn't add up. The invoices were padded, the dates didn't align, and the signatures carried ink that looked suspiciously recent. Behind the polite smiles of the board was a machine designed to strip his pockets clean. The treasurer muttered about contractors, but the address led to a padlocked storage unit. The receipts showed work supposedly completed years ago, but the photos were stock images from another state. Who did they think they were fooling? And why were the rest of the neighbors too terrified to question it? Karen stood at the next board meeting like a queen in her throne, tossing threats like confetti. Late fees, court dates, liens. Her voice was smooth, but venom dripped with every syllable. He raised the invoices, the fake signatures, the storage unit address. She smirked and leaned closer. Fight us, and we will bury you in debt. Fight us, and you will lose the last piece of your father. Around the room, board members avoided his eyes, some trembling, others smirking with the comfort of power. Was this a neighborhood association or a cartel? That night he sat at his kitchen table with papers spread like a crime scene. He circled names, traced payments, connected threads. Something was off, something deliberate. Why funnel so much money into a project nobody had seen? Why build nothing but demand everything? His phone buzzed. A blocked number. The message was short, almost mocking. Stop digging, or the dam won't be the only thing that breaks. His blood ran cold. Who threatens a homeowner like that over dues? Unless the stakes were higher than anyone dared admit. Storm clouds gathered in the forecasts. The same forecasts the board had ignored. The same forecasts Karen dismissed while sipping wine, promising her mansions were safe. But why were they safe? That was the question that kept him awake at night. Why did they demand his money, threaten his home, but never once set foot near the dam they claimed to be repairing? What was hiding behind that silence? As water surged toward their marble staircases, Karen's eyes caught sight of something that froze the smirk she wore so proudly. From his jacket pocket, slick with mud and rain, he pulled a battered USB drive. Small, unimpressive, yet lethal. Neighbors gasped, cameras zoomed in, officers shifted uneasily. Whatever was on that drive wasn't just numbers or invoices. It was the kind of truth that strips power bare and leaves empires drowning in their own lies. Karen's face drained of color, and for the first time, the queen of the mansions looked terrified. What was on that drive that made Karen's voice crack and her world collapse in front of everyone? The drive shook in his hand like a live wire. Behind it lay the paper trail no one in the neighborhood was supposed to see. Hidden bank transfers, signatures forged in neat loops, invoices for work that never existed. At the center of it all, the treasurer's brother pocketing checks for a company that wasn't even real. The address of the so-called contractor? A rusted storage unit 2 towns over, locked and abandoned. That was their repair. That was where the community's money vanished. And Karen had signed every line. He spread the documents across his table, each page darker than the last. Payments labeled as spillway reinforcement, but dated on weekends when city offices were closed. Photos proving repairs were finished, but a reverse search showed them stolen from a dam hundreds of miles away. Who forges an entire infrastructure project? Who thinks they can bleed a neighborhood dry without leaving fingerprints? It wasn't just greed, it was arrogance. They thought no one would dare check. The deeper he dug, the more it stank of betrayal. A maintenance worker, jittery and pale, whispered when no one was around. They hadn't repaired anything. Instead, they built a hidden berm, welding a storm gate shut so water would bypass the mansions on the hill and rush downhill into the cheaper streets. Protect the elite, sacrifice the rest. That was the unspoken deal. And now he had it in writing. The question was simple. Who else knew? And who was ready to bury him if he spoke? He stormed into the next meeting clutching the evidence. Karen greeted him with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. The board sat in silence as he laid the forged documents before them, as if daring them to deny it. Karen leaned forward, voice dripping with control. Late fees, court orders, bankruptcy. She painted his future with venom, each word a threat dressed as law. The room shifted, neighbors pretending not to hear, board members staring at the table. Nobody defended him. Nobody dared. Alone against a wall of silence, he stood shaking, wondering if the truth had any weight in a place like this. Karen rose, her heels clicking like a gavel. She mocked him for thinking paper could win against power. She promised he would regret this war. And then, the hammer dropped. An official letter slid across the table. Pay immediately or the lien begins. His father's house, his last anchor, now dangled over a pit. Rage clawed at his chest, but rage alone couldn't fight a machine this big. He needed something stronger. He needed proof nobody could deny, not even the city. That night, as thunder whispered in the distance, his phone buzzed again. No name, just a message. Check the gate at midnight. 3 words. Nothing more. His pulse spiked. Was it bait to lure him into a trap, or was someone inside finally cracking under the weight of their lies? He replayed the boardroom scene, the silence of people too scared to fight, the smirk carved into Karen's face. Someone wanted him to see the truth, or someone wanted him gone. The storm was coming closer. Time was running out. He pocketed the drive, packed the files, and stared out into the black night. Midnight was only hours away, and if the tip was real, he would uncover the secret that would either save his home or drown everything in front of him. The clock ticked louder with every heartbeat, and when the strike of 12 came, he would either find salvation or the trap that would end it all. Midnight came like a threat. He stood at the edge of the storm gate, heart slamming, every sound sharper than it should have been. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the night itself knew something was about to break. His flashlight swept over metal scars, fresh welding marks still warm to the touch. The gate wasn't repaired. It was chained shut, forced into silence. Water thundered behind it, begging for escape. Who sealed it? And why so close to the storm? Boot prints tracked through the mud, leading straight to a pickup with the HOA logo stenciled on the side. His stomach dropped. The board had been here hours ago, locking the neighborhood's fate into place. He crouched low, fingers brushing the prints, following them deeper. That's when he heard it, ragged breathing, someone lurking just beyond. Out stepped a familiar face. A board member, once his neighbor, now a trembling shadow of loyalty. He clutched a manila folder as though it might explode. The man's voice cracked as he handed it over. Inside were the real work orders, each signed by Karen. Build berm, weld gate, redirect flow, protect the mansion cul-de-sac. He whispered that they'd laughed about it in secret meetings, joking about drowning the lower streets to keep their basements dry. His eyes darted side to side, fear dripping from every syllable. He admitted he'd taken the bribe, a promise of waived dues and a seat on the board, but guilt had burned him alive since. His confession hung between them like a noose. Was he a savior now, or just another liar trying to shift blame before the storm washed it all away? The roar of an engine shattered the silence. Patrol lights flared across the dark, cutting through shadows. Karen's SUV screeched to a halt. She stepped out, a private security guard at her side, both carrying flashlights that sliced across the gate. Her smile was poison. She barked that he was trespassing, vandalizing community property, endangering lives. The guard moved forward, hand hovering near his weapon, daring him to resist. Her words twisted the truth, turning him into the villain while she draped herself in false authority. It was a trap, and she was snapping it shut with her usual precision. He held up the folder, shouting the words she feared most: her signature, her orders, her betrayal. Her face didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed, the kind of laugh that chills the blood. She claimed the papers were fakes, doctored by a desperate homeowner. She warned the officers nearby to cuff him before he destroyed evidence. Every second felt like quicksand. Did the police believe her? Did anyone care about the truth? Or had her money already purchased silence? Rain tapped on the metal gate, small drops turning into a steady rhythm. The storm was arriving faster than expected. He flipped open his phone and began recording, catching her words, her threats, her denial. Karen's eyes burned with fury as she realized she was on tape. She demanded the guard take the device, but before the man could step forward, another voice cut through the tension. Out of the darkness came a woman in a gray jacket, calm but commanding. She raised a badge, the glint unmistakable. A state investigator. Her arrival froze everyone. Karen's smirk faltered, her guard stiffened, and the board member who'd handed over the folder nearly collapsed with relief. The investigator's words were sharp. She was already investigating reports of altered flood zones and falsified repairs. She wanted the USB. She wanted the folder. She wanted answers now. But the storm behind the gate growled louder, impatient, and the night whispered a deadly truth. Proof or no proof, water doesn't wait for signatures. It breaks everything in its path. And just as lightning split the horizon, the gate groaned, metal straining under pressure. Something had shifted, and if it failed now, nobody standing here would escape the fallout. The investigator's badge cut through the chaos like a blade. Karen's voice, once so sharp, stumbled for the first time. The woman in gray demanded the USB and the folder, her tone cold and certain, her eyes scanning every face as if she already knew who was guilty. She spoke of reports from other neighborhoods, of storms that had flooded the poor while sparing the mansions. Fraud, she said, endangerment, deliberate sabotage. Karen snapped back that the HOA was private, outside her reach, but the investigator only smirked. Private power meant nothing when lives were on the line. The storm hammered closer, thunder rolling like a war drum. The investigator warned that if the gate stayed sealed, hundreds of homes downstream could be wiped out. She ordered it opened immediately. Karen's laugh was hollow, desperate. Clinging to control she was already losing. She shouted that no state authority could touch HOA property, that this was a community matter. Her words sounded confident, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Her security guard stepped forward, puffing his chest, but his eyes darted nervously toward the roaring gate. Even Muscle knew the water didn't care about contracts. The whistleblower board member, drenched in fear, begged Karen to relent. He admitted the signatures were hers, the payments stolen, the entire project a lie. Karen's face twisted with fury as she called him a traitor, swearing he would regret speaking. The investigator filmed everything on her body cam, catching every slur, every threat, every tremor in Karen's voice. The truth was unraveling in real time, but the danger was rising faster than any argument. The dammed water had grown restless, the groans of steel growing louder with each second. Would the proof even matter if the flood came first? He knew he couldn't wait. He shouted for the guard to help lift the gate, but the man froze, torn between orders and survival. Karen shrieked that touching the gate was sabotage, that anyone who tried would be sued into oblivion. The investigator raised her hand, voice steady, commanding the officers nearby to step in. But before they could move, the power cut out. Darkness swallowed the scene, leaving only the roar of water and the beating storm. Metal screamed as if alive. Someone was tampering with the gate in the shadows. Flashlights whipped across the black. Sparks flew from the mechanism. A silhouette moved fast, wrench in hand, twisting bolts back into place. Someone was trying to lock the water tighter to ensure the mansions remained dry even if it killed everyone below. The whistleblower screamed for them to stop, but his words were drowned out by thunder. Who was it? Another board member? A contractor? Or worse, someone sent to erase the evidence before dawn? The investigator lunged forward, but a splash of sparks drove her back. Karen clapped, her face wild, her voice cutting through the storm as she shouted that the evidence meant nothing if the flood came. She taunted that by the time the water burst, nobody would be left to tell the story. Her arrogance was almost convincing, but fear flickered behind her eyes. For the first time, her empire was shaking as violently as the gate behind her. He grabbed the folder tighter, the USB still burning in his pocket. Proof was one thing, but survival was another. He realized then the truth might never reach daylight if the storm swallowed them all. The investigator screamed for help as the mechanism groaned louder, bolts snapping like brittle bones. They were seconds away from catastrophe. And then the sound came, a piercing, gut-twisting crack that silenced everyone. The gate had shifted, not fully, but enough to unleash something monstrous waiting behind it. The night didn't end in silence. It ended in a roar that promised nothing would ever be the same. The crack of the gate was like thunder splitting bone. A surge of water spat through the seams, spraying mist that tasted like rust and fear. Everyone froze. The whistleblower collapsed to his knees, sobbing that it was over. The investigator barked orders, her badge raised like a shield, but chaos drowned her voice. Karen shouted above the roar that this was proof, not of her crime, but of sabotage. She spun the truth like silk, weaving lies even as the storm threatened to rip everything apart. And unbelievably, some of the officers hesitated, caught between her confidence and the truth unraveling in front of them. The board member who had flipped clutched the folder like it might save his soul. He begged the officers to listen, to look at the signatures, to believe him this time. His face was hollow, years of complicity cracking in a single night. Karen spat his name with venom, calling him a coward who sold his neighbors out for scraps. The man admitted it, his voice breaking, confessing that he had traded silence for a free ride, that he had watched them build the berm and lock the gate while he said nothing. His betrayal hit harder than the thunder. He had been one of them all along, and now he was trying to crawl back to the truth. Could anyone trust a traitor when lives were on the line? Before the officers could react, headlights pierced the rain. A contractor's truck rolled up, two men in work gear jumping out with a blowtorch and heavy wrenches. Karen ordered them forward, her voice cutting like a whip. They dropped their tools at the base of the gate, sparks showering as they tried to seal it tighter. He lunged, ripping the torch from one worker's hands, sparks burning his arms as they wrestled. The guard moved in, fists raised, but the investigator shouted to stand down. It was chaos, pure and raw, and every second the gate strained louder, closer to snapping completely. Then it came, the sound that froze every heart. A child's scream. High, piercing, desperate. Heads whipped toward the noise. Across the flooded street, a little girl clung to a porch post as water licked at her ankles. A dog barked frantically, teeth gnashing at the waves that threatened to drag her under. For a heartbeat, the war at the gate stopped. Even Karen's mask slipped. The flood wasn't theoretical anymore. It had faces. It had voices. It was here. He tore free from the contractor, grabbing a rope coil from the truck bed. Karen shouted that it was suicide, that he'd drowned before reaching her, but his legs were already moving. The investigator called his name, demanding he wait for backup, but there was no time. He waited out, water dragging at his legs like chains. The girl's eyes were wide with terror. The dog barked and barked until its voice cracked. He threw the rope, missed once, then again, until finally it caught the railing. The girl grabbed, the dog clamped its teeth into the fibers, and he hauled with everything left inside him. The water fought back, surging higher, nearly ripping the child from the line. His muscles screamed, vision blurred, but inch by inch he pulled them towards safety. Behind him, the contractor he had tackled slipped into the torrent. One scream, then silence. The man was gone. His death was swallowed by the storm, his greed washed away like sand. The irony was brutal, but there was no time to dwell. The girl collapsed into his arms, sobbing, the dog trembling against his chest. He staggered back toward the others, lungs burning, every step a war. But before relief could take hold, the gate bellowed one last time. A roar unlike anything they'd heard, like the world itself tearing open. The berm behind the mansions cracked, the ground shuddering as water shifted direction. Karen's triumphant smirk vanished, replaced with horror. The flood wasn't going where they planned. It wasn't racing downhill toward the poorer streets. It was turning back, surging straight into the hill of luxury. straight into their million-dollar homes. The night had chosen its target, and it was the empire Karen had built on lies. The berm gave way with a shudder that shook the ground. A wall of water surged uphill, smashing into manicured lawns and stone staircases. In seconds, the mansions that had stood like fortresses were swallowed, their grand facades breaking under the weight. Windows burst, basements erupted, and luxury cars floated like empty shells. The flood didn't discriminate. It tore through marble, chandeliers, and iron gates with the same fury it would have unleashed on the poorer streets. This was no accident. This was justice in motion. Karen's scream cut through the roar. She stumbled backward, drenched and frantic, mascara streaking down her face. She clawed at the investigator's arm, shrieking that her grandmother was trapped inside one of the collapsing mansions. The same woman who had mocked, threatened, and tried to strip everything from others was now begging for help. The irony was heavy enough to drown in. Neighbors stared, some with grim satisfaction, others torn by pity. Would anyone lift a finger for her now? He looked at the girl he had just saved, still clinging to the rope with trembling hands. The dog whined, pawing at his leg. Behind him, Karen's pleas grew louder, more desperate, her voice cracking with something raw and human. Her empire was gone, her mask shattered, but inside that mansion was family. His chest tightened. The choice was brutal. Walk away and let her feel the weight of her own cruelty, or go back into the storm and risk everything again. His answer came without hesitation. He shoved the child into the investigator's arms, wrapped the rope around his chest, and charged back into the chaos. Karen followed, stumbling, half-screaming directions. Every step forward was war, the water clawing higher, furniture crashing into him, shards of glass cutting his arms. He fought through it all, following her cries until he found the old woman pinned beneath a collapsed beam, her breath shallow, her eyes fading. For a moment, the world narrowed to that fragile heartbeat. He heaved, muscles tearing, until the beam gave way. Karen helped lift, her strength fueled by terror. Together, they dragged her free. The chandelier gave way above them, crashing down just as they pulled her into the current. The old woman gasped for air, alive but broken. They hauled her toward the door, fighting against the river that wanted to drag them under. When they finally staggered back outside, the investigator and officers rushed to pull them to safety. Karen collapsed to her knees, clutching her grandmother, sobbing harder than anyone had ever seen her cry. The queen of cruelty reduced to a woman begging for mercy. But the flood wasn't done. As the family was pulled away, troopers in rain-soaked uniforms stormed forward with warrants. Boxes of files, laptops, receipts, all seized from Karen's vehicle, from the board's office, from hidden safes ripped open by the investigators' team. Embezzlement, forgery, reckless endangerment. The list rolled on, each word striking like a hammer. Neighbors gasped as they realized the truth they had feared to speak was finally carved into law. Karen's empire wasn't just ruined by water. It was being dismantled piece by piece in front of everyone. Karen tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She glanced once at him, eyes wide, face pale. Then she leaned close, whispering words that chilled him deeper than the storm. "You don't understand," she said. "There's another account, older than all of this. A rainy day fund tied to your father's name." His heart stopped. His father? The man who built the original bypass, the one who had warned him never to trust the board? Why would his signature be buried in their files? What had he been protecting all those years ago? The water raged on, the mansion sinking deeper into ruin, but the real storm had only just begun. The truth wasn't finished with him. It had only scratched the surface. Days later, silence replaced the storm, but the ruins of the mansion still stood like monuments to greed. Walls sagged, roofs caved, and driveways once polished for luxury cars were buried in mud. The HOA's empire was gone, condemned by both the water and the law. What no flood could wash away, the investigators' warrants had finished. Neighbors who had lived in fear now gathered freely, their voices rising with something new, anger turning into resolve. The tide had shifted, and the people who had been trampled finally had power in their hands. The investigator called him into a room lined with salvaged files. On the table lay an old easement, yellowed and fragile, his father's name signed at the bottom. It was not a mistake. His father had built the original bypass decades earlier, designing it to protect the whole community, not just the rich. That document proved the HOA never had the authority they claimed. They had buried his father's legacy to seize control, twisting it into their weapon. His chest tightened as he traced the faded signature. The man who had raised him, the man who had fought for fairness long before this storm, had already given them the shield they needed. The board had stolen not just money, but history. Karen sat in custody nearby, her empire in chains. She watched through the glass as the investigator explained the easement. For the first time, her silence held no power. She had lost everything: her fortune, her homes, her throne, and now she was forced to watch as the truth returned to the people she had ruled with iron fists. She whispered once, almost too quiet to hear, that it wasn't over. But the words sounded hollow, stripped of all weight. Her reign had drowned with the mansions. At the town meeting, hundreds gathered, their voices carrying a different kind of thunder. For years, fear had kept them silent, but now they shouted with conviction. He stood before them, holding the rusted HOA badge plucked from the wreckage. Without a word, he dropped it into a jar of swamp water. Gasps filled the room as the symbol sank, bubbles rising like the last breath of the board's power. Then he lifted the easement high, his father's signature gleaming under the lights. The roar of approval shook the walls. For the first time in decades, the community voted unanimously to dissolve the old HOA and open the bypass permanently. No more secret gates. No more lies. The water would flow free, just as his father had intended. Relief washed over him, heavier than any flood. Neighbors who had once turned away now clapped his shoulders, some with tears in their eyes. The girl he had saved ran up, wrapping her arms around him, the dog barking happily at his feet. For a moment, the pain of betrayal, the exhaustion of war, melted into something almost impossible to describe. Vindication, closure, legacy fulfilled. Yet deep inside, a voice whispered that vigilance never ends. Power always seeks new hands, and greed always finds cracks to seep through. This victory was monumental, but it was not the end. Still, the story carried a weight larger than one neighborhood. It was a warning. What begins as a fee or a notice can grow into something monstrous if left unchecked. His fight was proof that truth can outlast fear, that courage can shatter corruption, and that even in the darkest nights, justice has a way of breaking through. And maybe that's why you're still here, listening. Because deep down, you know it could happen anywhere, to anyone. If it happened here, what would you do if it happened to you? If this story struck you, share it so others know the price of silence. Like this video so more people see the truth, and subscribe if you want to stand with those who refuse to be bullied by power. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done standing at that gate when the storm came? Because sometimes, one choice is all it takes to change everything.